see for himself, how things were doing. So they planned this secret trip. They kept it secret. They didn't tell the plants who was coming or when. And it was not easy to move Franklin Roosevelt around. Not only the security, the armor, but also his physical limitations. So they secretly trained him. The first stop has got to be Detroit. His first stop on that morning of September 18th. He's standing there. He just showed up. Imagine working on the line on these tanks, and you look up. My God, there's Franklin Roosevelt standing up there. He's ever the politician, waving at the guys. He's standing, holding onto the railing, of course. People always want to know about the black armband. His mother had died a couple months before Pearl Harbor. And I think, how long did they wear those black armbands back in the day? Maybe a year, something like that. But he's up there, and he's being cheered by the workers, and he just kind of showed up. Not even the people who ran the plant knew he was coming until a couple of hours before he got there. And Eleanor actually came along on this trip. She didn't travel with the president all the time, but she's there. They're riding in the back seat, riding through the Warren Tank Arsenal. That's the CEO, Mr. Keller of Chrysler, explaining the tank building process, and they seem to be paying great attention. And they took a tour of the inside of the plant. Then they went outside to the testing ground. There was a figure-8 testing ground. And this is an interesting picture to me. They're watching the demonstration of this new tank, the M4 Sherman tank, much better tank. And it was just kind of a new thing. And it went around, they were showing the demonstration, and it was going through puddles of water, and it was going through telephone poles. They had a bunch of tanks going around. And they're watching. And that's a nice picture. What is interesting about that picture is, about 30 seconds after it was taken, one of the M4s came barreling straight at the president's limo and stopped either inches or feet short. The mud was flying. The Secret Service was not amused. I'm sure somebody lost their job. What? You wanted to demonstrate the braking system? This was a bad idea. Roosevelt, say what you will about him, was a cool customer. He just laughed it off. Oh, it's a good drive, my man, a good drive. And everybody kind of laughed. But I've often wondered, how would history have been different if Franklin Roosevelt had been flattened in Warren, Michigan on September 18, 1942? It came close. In the afternoon, they have to go, the presidential party, out to Willow Run to see Henry Ford's plant. And that's Edsel with our back to us. And actually, there's Henry. And my caption for this picture, I think it's a great picture. Henry forces a smile. Because Henry did not like the New Deal. He didn't like the Roosevelts. In fact, the assembly line at Willow Run is L-shaped because somebody made a surveyor's error. It was built in, what's that county? Is it Washtenaw County, which was Republican at that time? Part of the plant was going to go into Wayne County, that evil place of Democrats and unions and high taxes and all that. So Henry made sure it has to be an L-shaped double line. So they couldn't find him. Edsel was the president and his wife were here. The official party. You got to come out and meet them. They sent a search party out. They found Henry in the most remote little workshop, and they dragged him almost. There he is, doing his nice smile for the president. Edsel goes on to say, then we made Dad sit between the Roosevelts. And Henry Ford was a kind of not a hugely tall guy. I think he was cranky when he was 10, but he was really cranky when he was in his 70s. And the Roosevelts are tall people, and you have Edsel and Charles Sorensen, the engineer, sitting across from him in the jump seat. And Edsel said, and my dad just scowled at me the whole time as we drove through the plant. The union workers cheered the president, and it was the longest ride of Henry Ford's life. It's kind of an amusing moment. This is Willow Run at full production. 42,000 workers, a third of them were women. I do have to say, those arrogant aircraft people out there on the West Coast, Boeing and Lockheed and all those, I want to use a bad word, I won't. They didn't think auto companies could build complicated bombers. And they scoffed when Ford got this contract. It was really Edsel Ford who made it happen. He's a hero. In fact, I think he worked himself to death. He died in 1943 of stomach cancer. He was under the stress was not helping. But what I want to say is it took a long time to get the Willow Run plant going. And they were laughing on the West Coast. It took about a year. We produced one plane in a year. We're not going to win the war that way. And out in California, they started to use the phrase, will it run? However, and it was embarrassing because Henry had blasted his name, shot off his mouth to the press. He said, we're going to build these B-20, we don't even know what they are, we're going to figure it out. We're going to build one per hour. And I'm sure Edsel's going, oh my God, Dad, why did you say that? Well, guess what? By 1944, one was coming out every 58 minutes, every 63 minutes, about one per hour. We were producing more tanks than in 1 month than Germany was producing a year in 1944. The same with the airplanes. A blizzard of stuff was coming out of Detroit. And Willow Run really became kind of known worldwide as the production miracle, along with, the name Henry Kaiser? He was cranking out these Liberty ships. Henry Ford. These are Rosie's. These are pictures from the Yankee Air Museum gave me. She's working on a plexiglass window there. Here's a glamour shot pose of a Rosie. They did hard jobs and they made good money. And a lot of these women remembered those days as the best days of their lives. Housing was an issue. 42,000 workers. The Willow Run plant did not have adequate housing. This is near the plant, near Ypsi. That's a two-family, that's like a duplex. Probably doesn't have great heat, if any. Plumbing is an issue. The kids probably aren't going to schools. That we did not build adequate housing, and it was cramped conditions, and people had to really suffer through some discomforts. Here's your typical crowded wartime conditions. This is a family in Detroit, doubling up. People took on boarders. Housing was a real problem, shortage. Streetcars. This is the Grand River streetcar downtown. And as I say, the last streetcar ran down Woodward in 1956. They ended that. But they're trying to bring some of that stuff back. I think streetcars are a great idea. And I said women were doing unusual jobs. Here's the first, Marguerite Watson, Detroit's first conductorette, on her way home from her shift. And, she was pretty proud to be doing her part. I had to have a picture from the UAW. There's a nice poster you might see at a war plant of, everybody chip in, no absentees, no waste, keep your mouths shut, do your job, and we're going to beat Hitler. I love that picture. This is Detroit, Pearl Harbor, the evening of Pearl Harbor. These are National Guard guys at the Windsor-Detroit Tunnel. They put some armed guards there, and also at the bridge, at the war plants, at the government buildings, the radio stations. These guys, I'm not sure they really know what they're doing. They look a little bit shaky to me, but we were under, great security risk. Nobody knew the Japanese might be coming. We didn't know if they were going to attack the West Coast. This is the Hudson's Street window in the middle of, this is 1943. And instead of, the new Easter fashions, it's all about patriotism, it's all about winning the war. And they have pictures of President Roosevelt and Douglas MacArthur, and it's all about patriotism. I'm told this flag was the largest in the world. I don't know if that's really true. Probably is. It's big enough for me. I love this picture. This is a bar on the Lower East Side of Detroit, and I don't know which bar it is. But what's happening is, it's a neighborhood bar. They put a fedora hat up there for every guy in the neighborhood who was in the service with his name there. And I just think that's a great, so even as you're at the bar, you're thinking about these guys. And, it just touched every aspect of life in Detroit. This is a civil defense drill in a school, I think, east side of Detroit. It's actually an racially integrated, which is not that usual. But kids were used to these civil defense drills, and a lot of them kind of thought it was fun, People had to dim their lights. There were civil defense neighborhood wardens who would bust your chops if you were using too much light. I discovered there was a 24-hour newsreel movie theater in Detroit, Telenews, down on Woodward. It was dedicated in 1942, Valentine's Day. They brought in Tyrone Power to do the gala opening. And you guys won't believe this, in this day of instant communication, people had to wait weeks to see these newsreels, black and white, and maybe the radio. And people would go, you could go 24 hours a day, there was a radio station in the basement, there was a news ticker in the lobby. And I'm told people would go to this Telenews theater and they look for, here's pictures from the Pacific. Is Jimmy there? Is he in that crowd over there? They were looking for their, it took a long time to get news back in that period. This is a fighter plane over the city of Detroit, very nice, crisp, clear picture. Is that a Warhawk? I think that is. And you can see the Detroit River there. Planes, a lot of security, very common to see soldiers, to hear planes. You know, it was Detroit in wartime. These are these Italians that I discovered that were the reason I wrote the book on. I apologize to those of Italian descent. This is the barber shop at Fort Wayne where they had Italian POWs. And when I told the history press, I found out this is a whole big program, and they let me write a second book. But you know, here are the happy-go-lucky Italians at Fort Wayne, and they did city jobs. They could work under the Geneva Convention. They were just about the happiest people on earth, these Italians. They felt they'd been rescued. They were surrendering in North Africa by the tens of thousands. Americans, take us, please. We'll put our weapons, antiquated weapons, in neat piles in the sand dunes in Tunisia. Yeah, we'll be shepherded into these stockades, and within about a minute they're going, hey, Joe, sigaretta? And the next thing is, Joe, you know my cousin Luigi in Buffalo? So the Italians were here. There were also mostly Germans, but 6,000 throughout the state. And Fort Wayne hosted POWs during the war. And somebody had this idea, let's pose this picture of happy-go-lucky Italians. Tuskegee Airmen at Selfridge Field. These guys look anxious to get their wings. They were there stationed for a brief time. You know about the Tuskegee Airmen, the red tail pilots. And, you know, Detroit was very segregated, I discovered. These guys were told, you can't go sit at a counter at, you know, Cunningham's drugstore, some of them. You got to be careful where you go. You can't go into a bowling alley except one night a week. You know, it was a segregated Jim Crow time. And, you know, as the city got very crowded, these guys had to be careful when they were off base. We had the worst race riot in Detroit in June of 1943 in the whole war. A lot of the boom towns, where you suddenly had whites and blacks, a lot of them from the South, jammed together, competing for jobs, competing for housing, recreational space. Life magazine had an article before this happened said, Detroit is dynamite. It was waiting a hot summer night, Belle Isle Bridge. You can imagine how it turns into this mob scene. And these are horrible pictures from that. They had to bring in 5,000 National Guard troops into Detroit in the middle of World War II, which is a pretty sad story. Other boom towns also had their race riots. Here's some National Guard guys looking at the news there. It's sort of, people, you know, I told you I'm not from Detroit. When I moved here, people would say, oh, let me tell you about the Detroit riot. And they're talking about 67, usually. Now I say, oh yeah, which one? 67, 43, there was one in the middle of the Civil War in 1863. There was one in the, we have a lot of race riots and violence and the problems. The propaganda in Germany and also Japan really played up our racial divisions. And here's a political cartoon in an American newspaper. And then you see the cities that had race riots. They're boom towns. El Paso, Los Angeles, Mobile. Detroit had the biggest one. And I think that's supposed to, this rat-like figure is Goebbels. They're just really, you know, America's racially, you know, at war with itself, and made for propaganda. And I guess that guy's Hitler pinning a medal on these thugs. Beer. Who likes beer in this room? Don't raise your hand. Detroit had patriotic beer. The Coppets Brewery down on Atwater. created Victory Beer. And there are 100 different labels. I had to pay for this one. They made in Lansing, they had some pictures. 100 different labels. With this has a Jeep car, they had planes, they had submarines, they had tanks and so forth. Coppett's Victory Beer. So when you went to the, and it's 3-2 beer, by the way. Did I mention that? Watered down. It is, rationing time. These are Detroit's sports superstars, of course. You recognize, who are these two people? Joe Louis and the heavyweight champ, and I think the greatest, and Hank Greenberg, our Hall of Fame Tiger. This is 1940, I think. Is Joe wearing a zoot suit? I can't quite tell. He's pretty elegant. Is that I don't think that's a zoot suit. It's not loud enough somehow. Joe was known as Detroit's Brown Bomber, and he gave up. He went in the Army and made, $100 a month or something. Traveled around, did boxing exhibitions. It's estimated that 5 million American troops got to see Joe Louis do boxing exhibitions, mostly in the Pacific. And Joe said, I'll do this, but I want the crowds that come to see me, it has to be racially integrated. So he was pushing for, times were beginning to change, and World War II was a catalyst for that. I'm going to save talking about Hank Greenberg to the end, because he provided the big slam bang finish for the book. Every author wants a big finish, and Hank Greenberg gave me one you won't believe. I'll save that. But sports continued. The Detroit Red Wings played at the Red Brick Barn down on Grand River? Olympia. And they won the Stanley Cup in 1943. They beat the Boston, and it was depleted. Sports continue. President Roosevelt said, continue baseball, continue the sports, it's good for morale. Depleted, a lot of our best players were gone, but I'll take the Stanley Cup anyway. And by the way, I got to go to the Olympia the last year it was going. Have you heard about Olympia? Are you a hockey fan? Who are my hockey fans in this area? What? I didn't grow up with it either. A friend of mine said, this is 1978, I'm in law school at Michigan. He said, look, I'm a big hockey, let's go see a Red Wings game. And we went to Olympia, and I just remember a little bit of claustrophobia. We're in the balcony or whatever looking, I thought we were going to fall into the ice. And I loved it. We were so close to the action. And it smelled like 40 years of beer, sweat. It was great. Cigar smoke. The next year he took me to this new play. Well, let's go to the new Joe Louis Arena. We were a mile from the action. So I'm sorry that's gone. The original Brick Stadium is gone. The war ends, of course, August of 40. 1945 is a roller coaster year. President Roosevelt dies April 12th, just 3 weeks before VE Day, where Germany surrenders. And then in August, something called the atomic bomb was dropped, a single bomb. That two of them were dropped actually, and this is the Telenews ad in the Free Press. Smashed to dust, atomized, and so forth. By the way, Palestine problem. Some things never change. Some parts of the world remain troubled. I think my general feeling about it, people debate the atomic bomb. The average person in Detroit said, "Thank God, whatever it is, Uncle Jim's coming home. He doesn't have to invade Japan." And that was the general feeling about it. And then people, they didn't know who Harry Truman was, but they said, we like what he did. VJ Day in Detroit, the biggest party the city ever saw. This is Grand Circus Park. I don't know what this guy, I don't know if he's drinking or what, but he's up there. And people stayed up late. Horns are honking. There's a lot of alcohol flowing. People are dancing. And it's a big, big party, and even little kids got to stay up late. Here's another one of my favorite pictures. This is Detroit, the night of VJ Day, the luckiest GI in this man's army. He's got 4 babes on his arm. Detroit had a Chinatown, and people forget the Chinese people were extremely happy to defeat Japan, and they're having their own celebration that night too. Japan had so brutalized China. Now, on a more somber note, this is the day after VJ Day. Yeah, okay. I'm to VJ Day, I'm almost there. This is the clock tower on my campus where you four are going to go. I got some pay-per-views. The day after VJ Day, they rang the bell 137 times for the U of D men who would not be coming back in the fall. I look around, there are evidence of World War II all over the place. This is the Brightmoor neighborhood near the Redford Theater on the west side, in the middle of the median there. This was dedicated by the Brightmoor neighborhood to the services in 1942. And it looks in pretty good shape, you know. The grass is cut, flags flying. But what I noticed as I took these pictures is people just whiz by it without ever looking at it. And I think that's what's great as you start to think about history. You see these things. You're right all around you. Anybody been to the Dakota Rathskeller? It's still going. And they let me take this picture. You know, they had this sing-along. And I have to say, before World War II, the big Finnish song that they Barrel House kind of singing, the big song was Deutschland über alles. And soon, by 1940, they said, let's ditch that. And they started to do God Bless America. Now, here's a trivia question. I don't know if you guys will know this, but raise your hand. Don't blurt it out. Who is the person who made God Bless America kind of an anthem for the country? The songbird of the South? Kate Smith. Kate Smith is correct. Give that man something. Paradise Valley, which was this, you know, hopping, crowded, overcrowded black section of downtown, is no more. It is now under Interstate 375. But I took this picture. At least there's a plaque, and you know, look at the people who with these Club Plantation, Club 66, Duke Ellington. It was a very hopping place in 1940s. This was a jazz club on West Tyreman. I took my life into my hands to take this picture. This was in 2015 I took this. The Bluebird Inn. And a lot of they play at the Paradise Theater or the Greystone, and then the young guys would go out to this club after hours, like Dizzy Gillespie and people like this. This was a jazz mecca. It was in very rough shape. As I say, I almost got run over a couple of times. But I have been told recently it has been purchased and it is going to be revitalized, the Bluebird Inn. Anybody recognize this? The Vanity Ballroom on East Jefferson? It had, you could get 3,000 dancers out on that floor at one time. And they built the wooden floor on springs, so when you're jitterbugging, you can bounce a little bit more. And I talked to a lady, she said, I was 14, 15 years old. Me and my girlfriends went dancing 3 times a week. It was the best fun we ever had. I would never marry a man who couldn't dance. And she said, and they serve burners. No alcohol. Good, clean fun. Here's where I kind of do, you know, I had to do some artists that said, coming this week, Jurassic Park. You know, I had to cut it off. But, you know, the Redford was built in 1928, Art Deco. It's a Japanese kabuki theater theme. And they painted that stuff over in the week after Pearl Harbor. Anything Japanese, yeah. And now it's a beautifully renovated community project, and they're finally beginning to restore those Japanese paintings, murals. Anybody recognize this place near the, what is that, 12 Mound, is it?
Yep.
You can take me there after. I'll be ready for a beer. This was founded by the De La Malure family. I think their son was a Hall of Fame football player for the Buffalo Bills. And they founded it in 1946. And my thought is, history. Why do they call it the Victory Inn? It's 1946. Still there. I love this picture. I took it in downtown Ypsilanti, an espresso bar called B24's. And I went in and I quizzed the Eastern Michigan students who were all sitting there doing the thing. I asked them, what's a B24? No one could tell me. I said, that's the thing that put this area on the world map. You should know what it is. Rosie the Riveter, I went to the Rosie event where we broke the Guinness Book of World Records. I even have some Rosie t-shirts, a few of them left from that event. They saved part of the bomber plant, and the Yankee Air Museum is a fantastic group. And even my students, even my 20-year-old students who don't know much history, a lot of them, everybody knows this we can do it thing. And I think that's a great thing. Almost done. Oh, this is my last slide. This is the Broadhead Naval Armory, and I just thought, let's end this with a nice honor piece kind of theme. I've been doing too much talking. Does anybody have a comment, question, or a story from World War II? Or, yeah, I'll kind of come around.
Just a question. Earlier you were talking about Boeing and some of the other...
Lockheed.
Yes. So were they actually also making things?
Oh,
which
yeah.
is not at the same... They needed Detroit's capacity?
They were making them a lot slower than we were. Edsel and Sorensen went out and they said they're making like 2-3 bombers a day. Henry says, we'll make 1 per hour.
They had the design, right?
They had, yeah.
It was their design.
Exactly. But they didn't think we could do it.
Right.
Can do, Moxie.
Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Oh,
I saw a hand moving there.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm very attuned to questions. Who has it? Are any of stories or how many of you are native Detroiters? Not me. One of my. Are you all East Siders? I've been told there's a difference. Are there any West Siders in the room who grew up on the West Side? Okay. By the way, what's the breakdown Michigan? How many Michigan fans? How many Michigan State? Okay, all right. Will you walk out to the car with me? Did you have it? Yeah.
Now, at the Fleetwood plant, didn't they make components for B-17s there?
Yes.
And how about the engines, the Detroit Diesel Allison?
Yes, and they were making these Merlin engines, Rolls-Royce engines. So we were making all kinds of all kinds of plane components. But the B-24 plant was making the whole plane.
Did you run across anything from Burroughs Corporation? I think they made bomb sites there in Plymouth. That's
Yeah.
where I started.
In Plymouth, okay, I didn't run across that particular place, but that's a real precision thing. And it was the auto industry that was able to do that conversion, so there's a lot of stories. Yes?
So you said you had a Hank Greenberg story?
Oh, okay, I do have my Hank Greenberg story. Anybody else have a story they want to share? I'll tell you mine. Hank Greenberg, I know about him. I'm a sports fan. I go to the America Park, there's 5 statues. Is there 5? He's one of the statues. He's a Hall of Famer. Everybody knows Hank Greenberg. Well, as I studied him a little bit, he really was Detroit's answer to Babe Ruth. 6'4", home runs. He hit 58, I think, in 1930, and he got robbed a couple times. They didn't want him to break Babe's record. And I think actually part of the problem was he was Jewish. Hank was the only openly Jewish ball player in the major leagues when it was America's pastime. And, he was born in the Bronx, and he wouldn't play on religious holidays, and he did not run away or tried to hide his religion. And keep in mind, this is when Henry Ford saying certain things, and Lindbergh, and there's a lot of Hitler, for gosh sakes, on the radio. Anti-Semitism is out there. And Hank said, I have a great quote from him, which became a chapter title. He said, I got to go out there. When I go out on the field, particularly in a visiting ballpark, I got to produce. If I don't produce, some SOB is going to be calling me every name in the book. And Hank said, so when I hit a home run, I feel like I'm hitting one against Hitler. Thank you for the chapter title. That's a fan. So every time he did it, he's showing something. So he's a hero. I think that's heroic enough, and his feats on the ball, on the field. And by the way, at the end of his career, the Tigers let him go. I think he ended up at Pittsburgh for a year in the National League. And in 1947, he was kind of older, but he went over to the dugout of the Brooklyn Dodgers, put his arm around a guy named Jackie Robinson, this kid, and said, here's how you handle the bigots. Let your play speak for you. And he kind of mentored Jackie Robinson. It's a nice story. So that's all good. He's also a war hero. He was in the China-Burma India Theater, where you were, for 4 years. He was in the service longer than any Major League ball player. A lot of them were gone. Joe DiMaggio, a lot of the players were gone. Ted Williams, for gosh sakes, Marine pilot. He did 2 wars, World War II and Korea. Hank was over there longer than anybody. He went in right after Pearl Harbor, and he saw a lot of action, and he came back with 4 battle stars. He came back in the summer of '45, like millions of GIs coming back, and he wants his job back. And so he rejoined, now picture the scene here, it's July 4th, 1945. War is almost done. Japan's on its last legs. July 4th, Bridge Stadium. Hank Greenberg comes and he hits a home run the first game. They blew the roof off the joint. You know, he's back. Well, he kind of was, but he was also older, beat up, injury prone, slower. Wasn't quite the Hank Greenberg of his glory days, but he played well enough. He scuffled through it, you know, and people were watching him. For 3 months, he played well enough to help the Tigers actually stay in contention after some bad years. The Tigers go to the last game of the season, and they're in contention to go to the World Series. And they're playing at St. Louis Sportsman's Park, the St. Louis Browns, and they had long been eliminated, and there's hardly anybody in the stands, and it's cold, but the pennant's on the line. And here's what I discovered. Hank had made a throwing error early in the game. He struck out several times. He comes up to the ninth inning, and the Tigers are trailing by 3. And there are 2 men on base, and the St. Louis manager walked a guy to get to Hank Greenberg, but he's going to be an easy out. Bases loaded. Ball 1, ball 2, third pitch, he lines it just inside the left field foul pole. I get a chill thinking about it. Grand slam, home run, puts the Detroit Tigers into the 1945 World Series. Last game of the year. Oh, yeah. Now, the sad part of the end of that story, I'm a Cubs fan, and they beat the Cubs in 7. Hank get another couple, and we didn't get another taste until, well, 2016. But, you know, imagine people listening to that on the radio, the ride home, and my feeling is lots of veterans were watching that and saying, I can do this too, with great inspiration. So, if you don't know that much about Hank Greenberg, look into this man. He had moxie coming out of his ears. Any other, I think, yes?
What did they do with the Broadhead Naval Room?
It's mothballed.
So what did they do at the time when it was?
It was used, there were a lot of Navy people in town, and it was used for training and induction and all kinds of things for the Navy. They were also, you know, on Belle Isle, they were doing kind of landings, landing craft. So the Navy was highly present here for the Great Lakes.
And I assume you know that Fort Wayne was the induction center for Vietnam.
Yes, for generations of guys, all the way through Vietnam. So when I say all these happy-go-lucky Italians at Fort Wayne as I go around the state, a lot of guys say, I remember it's my induction center. I have a different memory of Fort Wayne.
I just had a quick story. My mother was one of 5 girls born in Detroit, and she used to say that at the time of the war, she and her older sister, they were probably 16 and 17 or something, would go where the officers were dancing, and because of the restrictions on nylon and the use of it,
What do they use nylon for?
parachutes.
Yeah.
So she said they would draw a line up the back of their legs so they looked like they had.
Oh, yes. I talked about that, bottled stockings. Rationing is quite amazing. Yes. This is where I get my exercise. This is a lot different than my day job.
Well, my dad is 90 now.